Good evening. I'm pleased to welcome you to our second online artist tour in the framework of the project Uncivil Society. Today, we are hosting the filmmakers Reinhardt and Bence Flieghauf. In their films, both have dealt with acts of neo-Nazi violence in Germany, respectively in Hungary, in quite different ways. While Reinhardt approaches victims of racist violence in Germany in Der Zweite Anschlag, the second attack, in the form of a documentary film, Bence Flieghauf's Just the Wind is a feature film about a series of murder of Roma in Hungary in 2008 and 2009. Both will discuss their different approaches today. With the project Uncivil Society, various Goethe-Instituts are dealing throughout the year with racist violence and neo-Nazi terror in a pan-European perspective. The discussion tonight will again be moderated by the film, media and theater critic Matthias Dell. Dell works as a journalist for medias such as Deutschlandradio, Zeit Online and the film magazine Cargo, among others. The discussion between Henrike Naumann and Christina Bavia from Forensic Architecture, announced for the end of April in our series, had unfortunately to be postponed until July. But now, I wish you an informative evening.
Ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich zum zweiten Teil der Gesprächsreihe in dem Projekt Uncivil.
Welcome to part 2 of our discussion around Uncivil Society, a project of the Goethe-Institut in Brussels, Budapest, Milan and Oslo. And today, 10 years after the NSU process in Germany, we want to ask ourselves to what degree the art can contribute, what the art can tell us about right-wing extremism and right-wing violence. This is a European project, and the idea is to broaden our horizon and to not only talk about German issues. In part 1, we tried to see what theater can do with regards to this topic. We have now reached part 2 and are now going to look at 2 films, one documentary and one fiction film. And the idea is to talk about right-wing violence. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Bence Flieghauf from Hungary, the director of the movie Just the Wind. Hello, Bence Flieghauf.
Hi.
And Mala Reinhardt is here too. She's still studying at the University Konrad Wolf, but 2018 she already took part in the competition of the documentary festival in Leipzig with a project called The Second Attack, a documentary about the victims of right-wing violence. Hello, Mala Reinhardt. We're going to be talking for about an hour. The discussion is going to consist of 3 parts. We are going to start speaking about the films, of course, with Mala and Bence. And then in part 3, we're going to try and have a discussion, all 3 of us. In light of the chronology, well, I would like to start with the Hungarian project by Bence Flieghauf. Csak, szél is the name of the movie, Just the Wind. It is a story of a series of murders which took place in Hungary in the years 2008 and 2009. Back then, attacks were committed on Roma and Sinti families. There were 55 injured, 5 of them were heavily injured, and 6 people died. And the movie explains in a fairly simple structure about one day in the life of a Roma family consisting of an 11-year-old boy, an older teenager daughter, a mother, and a grandfather who needs to be cared for. So we see this whole day of the family. We experience discrimination and violence. We realize that there is a danger, that the environment is hostile. But nevertheless, one could also say that without the introduction, where one refers to this real series of murder, one perhaps doesn't quite know how to place the lives of these four figures. We'll take a quick look at the movie in order to give us an expression. There's a scene where the 11-year-old boy, who's perhaps also aware of the arising danger and has therefore built himself a little cave, and can also be seen in a house where a Roma family was subject to an attack, and he is then surprised by two policemen who tell us what they find and how they relate to the different Roma families. So we're going to look at this quick.
Ez nagyon durva. Az feküdt a csávó. Van a szobában? A szobában a csajhoz, meg a két gyerek. Szép. Hallottad a disznót? Már inkább malac volt az. Itt rohangált föl alá a füstbe. Vicsorgott, mint egy állat. Amikor jöttek a tűzoltók, akkor neki rohant az egyiknek, az meg jól oldalba rúgta, és akkor lelépett. Állítólag még mindig itt van valahol a környéken. Éjszakánként bemászkál az udvarokba. Vernyog, mint egy csecsemő. A cigányok meg rettegnek tőle. Nagyon beteg. Ja. A vadászok már rajta vannak.
Ez milyen már? 4 családot megcsinálnak. Gyerekek, nők, minden. Nagyon ki van ez találva.
5. Ez az 5. család. Most sem használtak mobilt. Nem mentek fel az autópályára. Most is profi vadászfegyvereket használtak, és senki nem látta őket. Csak a lényeget baszták el, de azt nagyon.
Szép sorjával előtték ezeket is, mint a többi 4 családot. Ez a lényeg, nem?
De kiket? Ezek nem élősködők voltak. Ezek iskolába járatták a gyerekeiket. Volt fürdőszobájuk. Ezek dolgos cigányok voltak. Az ilyeneket nem kell leszedni. Ezzel csak összezavarják az üzenetet.
Te miről beszélsz?
Az üzenetről. Ha dolgos cigányt lősz le, azzal semmire sem ész. Akkor nem értenek meg semmit az egészből. Azt fogják hinni, csak azért ölik meg őket, mert cigányok. Mint ez egy rasszista gyilkosság lenne.
So this was an excerpt from Just the Wind by Bence Flieghauf. Perhaps before I give you the floor, it would be worth mentioning the following. In Germany, but also in Hungary, this series of murder to the Roma and Sinti families from 2008 and 2009 weren't all that present. Perhaps you could briefly tell us how the series of attacks was presented in the media back then. How did you get to know about this?
During that time when this happened, I was shooting in Germany in a very different approach. It was a kind of science fiction story. And then during that time, I was reading a newspaper which has an essay or a social graphical essay about what's happened. And it touched me deeply. And I decided very soon after this shooting is done in Germany, I will go back to Hungary and try to do something about this. Because to my surprise, nobody even touched the subject, even though it went on for years. Including myself, I didn't realize the the seriousness of this until I read these articles. Basically, that was the starting point, and also financingly, it was relatively easy to make it because it was a very low budget film, and because of some previous credits, I was able to have that instant money. You know, when we're speaking in filmmaking, it's always very crucial how you can get the money for the actual project. So it was like, okay, now this is happening, now it's very important, and I have this small amount of money and I can combine the two. And then I went for it.
Jetzt haben Sie ja in Ihrer 20-jährigen Karriere als
In your
Filmemacher
20-year career as a director, you've also made documentaries. Why did you decide to choose fiction for this movie, even though one could say that there are different parts that could be alike to a documentary?
Yes, you are right. You are right, and there is a fantastic documentary about that, by the way, which coming at the same time when Just the Wind came a year later, which thematized the whole thing. And actually, it's very good to see the two things together, like right after another, because mine is dealing with that state of mind when you know that somebody's hunting on you, but you don't know why and you don't know who. That was the kind of way I wanted to do. And the documentary is dealing with how these people, what they did in the trial, in the courtroom, what's happened with them and what was the motives, and then everything became clear. I use the fiction because usually I do fiction films. Plus, I really love the social cinema, and I always wanted to do that, to be there in the real situation with real people. There are not really real actors in this film, mainly non-actors playing in it. So this is a kind of combination of fiction and documentary in many aspects. So it wasn't a yes or no. It was more like, wow, let's make a fusion about it. Because what is very important, and that I didn't know when I made this film, but I just learned the lesson after that. What is very important is not just the topic of the film, and not just the to accomplish that kind of film, but also the contribution between the two. You know, a minority on one hand and the majority on the other hand. So one of the richest area where I was living in that time in Budapest, which is like the most bourgeois place what you can imagine. Like imagine you have a huge flat in Mitte. So I was that kind of life situation in that time, and just imagine that I was traveling into the Roma villages, which was exactly in a way how you saw it in the film, with no electricity, water sometimes, but not even that. And then this kind of social shock, what we experienced, was very important. When I say we, I'm speaking on the rest of the crew, who has more or less the same kind of existential circumstances what I had. But it's also important for the other way around, how the Romas was meeting with these people who weren't really just go there to do like, you know, catastrophe tourism, but they really wanted to do something, and here are these people who want to understand my real problem, you know, and that was important. And at the end, the point is how these two group of socially different group of people making one mission together. You know what I mean? So the making of the film itself is an example how you can contribute to be against the racism.
Was haben Sie sich überlegt bei der Form, wenn man
When thinking of the form,
versucht, von so einer Anschlagsserie zu erzählen?
when you say that you want to tell the story of a number of attacks and you want to do this in a fictional form, then of course you have a number of opportunities, genres and forms by which you could tell the story.
Yeah.
In movies and in the arts, there's a lot of fascination for the offenders. There's a lot of movies about criminals that plan the perfect attacks, the perfect robberies, etc. There's all kinds of ways to also think about who to award sympathy in a cinema. And often the offenders, the perpetrators, are actually interesting figures. But it is, of course, a huge issue, a problem, when you make movies about right-wing violence, that this is something that perhaps you don't want to empathize with. You, however, have decided to really stay on the side of the victims and to depict this threat as something without a face.
Yeah.
We don't really see
I
the
think-
people.
I think it's for me, it's somehow it's coming into from my gut, is that if you are doing such a film, you have to, I mean, you can portray the evil, you know, or the one who commit the crime, but there is an approach, and you have to start with the victims, you know, and then later, if you want to continue, then you can go to the people who committed the crime, which is actually, as you said, as you suggested, that that's more difficult in some way, because you can easily glorify that kind of acts. However you portray them, some people, even if if you portray them aesthetically detailed way, all of a sudden you can find yourself in a very tricky territory, which is the diabolical portraying, you know, which is very dangerous because the people find it magnetic. I went to the victim sides exactly because of that reason. I wanted to somehow express the way when you don't see the ones who attack that. So the people who didn't see this film, just want to tell you that you don't see the criminals at all. So there is not even one single shot about them. But in the atmosphere, everybody knows that the hunting is going on, but you never see the hunter, which is actually, if you think about it, that's one of the most suspenseful aesthetic situation what you can imagine, because the immanent enemy, something that you cannot target.
Ich würde ja auch sagen, dass es sogar ein sehr gutes Bild dafür ist, wie rechte
This is also a good image of how right-wing violence is being perceived by society and the media, because especially the figures behind it aren't really present. In Germany, for example, there's a long story of left-wing violence with the RAF. All of them became quite famous, with all kinds of posters around town, a lot of pop and cultural material as well that oriented itself.
Yeah, myself, I had a rough, the rough T-shirt, the Red Army friction T-shirt when I was a punk. I bought it in Berlin, in Kreuzberg, in that time, like in the end of the 90s.
No,
I know that it's horrifying. It's just like how Mao Zedong was very popular in the French intellectuals, and still you can see posters of him. So this is exactly what you are saying. It's very, very dangerous it's a sensitive subject in that way.
Genau, aber die Frage ist natürlich, auf der einen Seite bildet es praktisch
The question is, You have on the one hand this facelessness of right-wing violence here in your movie, but on the other hand, you also want to think about how to give it more attention. So I'm now speculating, but perhaps it could also be important to show figures where you really see a face.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what I'm saying now is something that I learned after the filmmaking. This is important. So I wasn't that clear in that time, but now I understood that the key element of film, Just the Wind, is that since you don't see the people who committed the crime, just only see the victims, and you understand the film itself build up in a way like there is no chance to you as an audience. You have to be very, you have to empathize yourself for these people. And if you don't do that, then you immediately switch yourself to the murderer side, you know? And this is very important because all the time when we have the vulgar conversation, the trash talk about the Roma people here in Hungary, and it's actually going on in every minority all the time, everywhere in the world, is when you got that trash talk, then the people always coming with, you know, it becomes easily a kind of dialogue where you can measure the thing, you know, yes, but they are, yeah, but some of them stealing, and there is this, you know, there is no conspiracy, but it's there a little bit, and that kind of thing, you know. And Just the Wind, just if there is something good in this film, speaking about how the art transforms social problems to be something which what you can digest, is that it's just rid of this, you know, all the shields and armors what you have, then you had to put it down and empathize for those people. And actually, sometimes I think that we succeeded in that, and it's happens. At the end, I met with a lot of people who hate the gypsies in a way, like they didn't even know they hate them, but they are, who were just very touched about the film.
Das wäre jetzt in diesem Teil meine letzte Frage gewesen, bevor wir dann
That would have been my last question. And perhaps we can move on to Maler Reinhardt's movie and then speak all together afterwards. And the question, of course, is how is this film received? It won a prize in Berlin. So you were present at this festival.
Yeah, it's.
But how was it how was this perceived in the Hungarian media as well?
Yeah, I just the most important part for me, I try to keep it quick, is that I never ever felt myself that you know, contained, like I was there in that time, because all of a sudden I felt that I have some function in this society, you know. So if you do your art house movies, it's an isolated place, and there is no conversation between, whatever intellectuals are not really doing any conversation, or if they have it, sometimes you feel that it's fake. But in this time, it was fantastic to see. Like I felt myself, I'm in the stream of the social conversation. That was beautiful. But what your question was, how was it received in the Hungarian media? Officially, they love it. The comment section was full of hatred. They called me like the ass licker of the, you know, the one who licks the ass of the gypsies, kind of things, even before they saw the film, and after that too. And there were some Roma, to my surprise, there was some Roma celebrities in Hungary who were really pissed off the film because they said that it's the Romas represents in a way like they are dirty and filthy people, you know, and these people was billionaires who get electricity and water running in their houses and so on. But the people in the film, of course, they didn't have. So that was very surprising. And politically, it was ignored. There was this scandal in the Berlinale when the Hungarian government you know, annoyed themselves with these papers, but they put it in the press conferences to saying that we are not, the Hungarian situation has nothing to do with this situation. This is a fiction film. And it became an issue in Germany, and then it became an issue in Hungary, and they kicked off that people. So they fired them because of this PR mistake. And I made a lot of courses and workshops and everything. I really loved it because I went into the xenophobia very deeply, and I also understood and made a lot of workshops and lessons about the biological, the evolutionary roots of the xenophobia, which is one of the most exciting questions ever in this topic.
Da können wir vielleicht später drauf zurückkommen noch. Vielen Dank fürs erste, Maler Reinhardt.
We'll get back to that later. Thank you very much for now. Maler Reinhardt, 2018, the second attack could be seen on the festival in Leipzig for documentary movies. You are the director. It's a documentary about the story before the NSU process, also told by the protagonists of, victims of attacks. We'll take a quick look at your documentary. Ibrahim Aslar tells a story of how it was to be the victim of right-wing violence in Mölln.
Das Haus wurde neu renoviert, nach 5 Jahren. Und uns hat man in einem Dilemma gesteckt. Entweder zieht ihr in das Haus wieder rein, oder ihr könnt in eine Asylunterkunft. Mein Vater hat gesagt, meine Mutter ist als Gastarbeiterin hergekommen. Es kommt gar nicht in Frage, in eine Asylunterkunft einzuziehen. Und die haben gesagt, ihr habt aber keine andere Wahl. Und dann hat mein Vater sich entschlossen, in das gleiche Haus wieder einzuziehen, wo uns das ganze Leid zugestoßen ist. Ich musste, also, wenn ihr euch das so vorstellt, ich musste jeden Tag die Treppen runterlaufen, wo meine Oma verbrannt ist. Ich musste jeden Tag aus dem Fenster rausgucken, wo meine Schwester wahrscheinlich ihren letzten Atemzug genommen hat. Und auch aus dem Fenster rausgucken, wo meine Mutter runtergesprungen ist. Und das als Kind so. Es gibt 2 Anschläge. Der erste Anschlag ist der nicht vermeidbare Anschlag. Das ist der Anschlag, der in dieser Nacht, an diesem Tag passiert ist, von irgendwelchen Neonazis, von Faschisten, von Rassisten. Den können wir nicht vermeiden, der ist schon passiert. Und dann gibt es den zweiten Anschlag, das ist der Anschlag der Gesellschaft, der Medien, der Politiker, der Justiz. Und dieser Anschlag ist definitiv bei weitem der schlimmere Anschlag. Und das beeinträchtigt unsere Psyche, das beeinträchtigt unser Leben und das beeinträchtigt alles, was wir besitzen.
So that was Ibrahim Aslan from the movie by Maler Reinhardt, The Second Attack. Perhaps you could tell us when you started working on the documentary film, what kind of stories were there about right-wing violence and terror in Germany? How did you get to this perspective? We started in 2016, working on the documentary. At first, we took a look at what is available about the topic, and we quickly noticed that there are regular reports when there are racist attacks. It does become a subject in the media, but what is missing is the perspective of the affected people, of the victims. This perspective doesn't appear in the media. And when this became clear to us, we said we want to do a documentary that only deals with this perspective.
Sich quasi dem entgegenstellt, dass es so ein gesamtgesellschaftliches Schweigen eigentlich gibt.
To counteract the fact that not a lot is being said about the perspective of the victims. So that was a starting point. The silence that people know about this, find out about this, but still only have few discussions about racism and right-wing violence, that very few talk about this in their circle of friends and families. And in our work with the protagonists, we also realized that our conversation partners knew exactly what they were talking about. They had these words. And then your documentary was released at a time during the NSU process or afterwards, and at this point there was also a look at the history of right-wing violence in Germany. So after the NSU revelation in 2011, the amount of victims that were counted by a number of associations, that this, for example, gained more importance and attention in the media. And what I find really interesting in the documentary is that you also have victims of the NSU, in this case, the Hamburg attack on Suleiman. But you also go further back and you speak about a figure such as Ibrahim Aslan, who survived Mölln, but also had to experience parts of his family die. And he basically tells exactly the same story. He tells about his experience of silence. Do you feel like this was a time when more conversations were had? Or was Ibrahim Arslan someone who simply was also of the opinion that the silence needs to end? This was very different. When we started working on the film project, there was not a whole lot about it. There were perhaps documentations about individual attacks. What we did was to portray a continuity. Bejarano also takes the floor in our documentary, who survived Nazi concentration camps. So we offer a certain degree of continuity, and we also try to create a connection between the racist attacks, which aren't only ever individual deeds committed by individual people. So I don't think there was another movie that portrayed it in this manner. And then, of course, what happened in the US with George Floyd, that led to a global debate about racism. And I think this also came over to Germany. And today in 2021, the conversation about it is very much different to when we tried to collect resources for the documentary. And in the end, we financed this documentary by our own means largely, because it was hard to find funding. Perhaps to speak about our discussion partners, well, for us it was very important to offer the perspective of different levels, to have the time level that even before the 90s there was racism, right-wing violence. It was important to have Gülcan Aşçı there, who had lost her partner in '85 in Hamburg due to a racist attack And in Germany, there is often the narrative that right-wing violence only suddenly started after the reunification. So that is something that was important to us, to disprove this, so to speak, but also to show that this is something that is happening in the whole of Germany, that it isn't only an Eastern German problem, but that these violent acts take place all over the country. You have mentioned Ramazan Afce in the 80s and his murder in Hamburg. And in the documentary, Ibrahim Aslan tells a story of how he discovered that there were already issues ahead of the attack in Mölln. That allows you to place things much easier. And he himself is surprised by not knowing that there had already been something before Mölln that somehow relates. How difficult was it to enter into the discussion? You notice at the beginning with Osman and Suleiman that there are still a lot of emotions arising. Also years later, what was your experience? How difficult was it to speak with the victims? We took a lot of time when approaching the protagonists because we knew that many of them had already experienced being in front of a camera and being interviewed without really being able to be satisfied with the result. Often they felt like their words were changed, or that the aim wasn't really to tell their story, but something that had already been agreed upon in advance. And that's why we decided to really take our time. And we also explained our project in great detail ahead of asking them for an interview. But after the first interviews, I think it is fair to say that it became clear that we have a serious interest in what the people are telling us, and that the aim is not only to have them say a few words about a preset story, but that instead we want to make a documentary based on what they are telling us. And this was, of course, a door opener. I think it can be said that a relationship of trust was created. And we were also passed on, so to speak. We could have conducted a lot more interviews if we had wished to do so. So at some point, the level of trust was very elaborate. And we also showed the documentary to all of the protagonists ahead of the opening night. They all gave us the green light. And still today, for individual screenings, our discussion partners are there to actually present the documentary, partially even without us. Ibrahim Aslan also often shows the documentary in schools without us being present. So we do have the full support of our discussion partners. Could you perhaps also say something about the reception? You just said it. I'm not sure if you could say more or perhaps give us more details about it. You said that it was difficult to find funding. Could you perhaps tell us more about the issues you encountered and how the movie was then received during the festival as well as afterwards? You don't usually receive an explanation for a rejection. So all we can do is speculate why it was so difficult to find funding. At the end of the day, the situation today is very different. I think if we'd presented this project a couple of years later, then possibly the decision would have been different. But for us, it was, of course, an extremely important moment. It was important for us to present this in Leipzig, because it was basically voluntary work that we did for years alongside our other jobs. And all of this work all of a sudden was given sense that people would see this documentary and that these stories weren't told without a reason. And after having these interviews, it became clear to us that we were given a lot of trust, and the protagonist told us these stories in great depth, and therefore it was impossible to not release this documentary. It was, of course, our responsibility to also do something with the stories we were told. The documentary was presented in a lot of festivals in Germany, not many abroad. And that is, of course, also due to the fact that it explicitly relates to events that are part of general knowledge in Germany, but are completely unknown abroad. So the documentary was also shown at a lot of individual events. We were invited to schools. We also had screenings at police training school. So it is fair to say that documentary was shown in a lot of different settings. And I think it can be said that the reception in general was rather positive. That many people also got a new perspective about events they had already been told about. Many know the images of the burning houses in Rostock, for example. These images became known through the news, but then all of a sudden, a new perspective is offered to them, a perspective that they hadn't known in the past. And so in the screenings thus far, the reception was rather positive. And with regards to the funding and the possibility to do this movie, it was interesting to see that you finished the documentary before the final verdict of the NSU process in Munich. There's another movie that was released last year where people were very disappointed by the verdict of the court. So one could basically speak of a third disappointment for the fact that there is no justice for your own loss, because the verdict could be considered as rather unusual and perhaps even scandalous with regards to the question of how high this network was. And the court, of course, concentrated on only a few figures. And this led to, but you did not have such experiences during your screening. The process in Munich wasn't the focus of attention for us at the time, because this process was, of course, ongoing for many years. And ahead of the verdict, I think the disappointment has already taken place. And in the discussion with Osman Taskapru, this is clear. He says that he's not expecting anything from the courts in Munich. And that's also exactly what happened in the end. None of his questions were answered. The interview took place 16 years after the murder of his brother, and he is still asking himself the same questions. Why my brother? Why my brother? And nobody is going to answer these questions to him. And he also no longer expected this when we spoke to him. So the resignation did not become larger in light of the verdict in Munich.
Dass quasi das ganze Thema Erinnerungskultur und eigentlich so eine Art verfehlte Erinnerungskultur in Deutschland, dass das ein viel, viel größeres
But a much bigger topic was the failure to have a good culture of remembrance in Germany.
Als eben dieser Prozess in München, den sie quasi sowieso schon abgehakt hatten.
They basically already dealt with the disappointment of the process in Munich at that point. Perhaps this is something we can speak about together in our discussion round. But allow me to also speak about the experience of such violence. How can such experience be anchored into the consciousness of a country. There was also a movie which won a prize called Lord of the Toys. And this movie also related to right-wing memes, a lot of this language, and this very complicated, hard to recognize irony and sarcasm, which we then also saw during the attacks of Halle and Christchurch. That there are a lot of people that are at home in these cultures, says a speaker. So there was also this film that was rather interesting and also depicted the protagonist, and this film then won the main prize in the competition with a strange explanation that this also related to real life and did not only remain in the remit of one's own family. That was the explanation for this film winning the prize. But then if you compare this film to your film, this once again shows what I said beforehand, that there's a lot of fascination for the culprits, for the neo-Nazis, for the perpetrators of right-wing violence, that the fascination for these people is often a lot greater than the empathy for these victims. I'm not sure if you want to say something about this, how you experienced it.
Es war natürlich eine große Diskussion. Diese Preisverleihung wurde ja dann auch.
The award ceremony, of course, was subject to a large discussion. It was also discussed in the media.
Natürlich, es war, ja, ich weiß gar nicht genau, was ich dazu.
I'm not entirely sure what to say about this. I don't want to now cast judgment about Lord of the Toys.
Also es zeigt natürlich auch einfach mal wieder diese Unlust quasi.
But it does show that there is a lack of desire to deal with the stories of the affected people. I wanted to comment this because it's interesting, and perhaps it can also lead to the following question. And this would perhaps also be my first question to Bence Flieghauf. The movie was released in 2012. It tells the story of these attacks in 2008 and 2009. And you'd think that after seeing this, and if you do create empathy and understand what terrible acts took place there, that this could change something, to speak in a utopian manner. But I assume that even in Hungary, it is the case that these forms of attacks and that this form of hatred continues to persist. Or how would you observe the situation over the last 10 years after your movie was released in Hungary?
The migration helped a lot, which sounds strange, but it's happened because of the Hungarian government started to create a kind of narrative that the migrant people coming to Hungary, they will steal our jobs and all that. And they didn't, so they went into the target zone. And therefore, nobody cares about the gypsies anymore. So the Romas, you know, the Romas are a kind of chandala in Hungary, which means they have no really social function, and they are the power always puppeting with them how they want to, you know. So when they want to have their vote, which is going on right now, then they give them potatoes, but they don't give them any education to judge that situation, what the potato as a present means because of the before of the election. So so basically what has happened in the last 10 years, they became out of the focus in the society, in the narrative. They are not that relevant anymore. But now, again, they became interesting because the election is on our neck, and then everybody needs their votes. you know, they use them. I mean, the power use them. And but on the other hand, on the civil sphere, there are a lot of people who are working with Roma peoples, and there are achievements actually, and that's fantastic to see. Basically, one of the most important lessons that I learned in that time with this journey called Just the Wind is that the education is everything. So whatever you do, however you communicate with this, however whatever your intellectual, you know, statements about it, but the point is always everything is going to the same point, which is we have to do something with the education. Education in the meaning that education for the white racist people and education for the Roma people, and also, it sounds banal. I don't know how banal it sounds. For me, it sounds banal, but that's also important, that to somehow create projects which help to work together for these people, you know, because this is one of the most significant strategy to kill the prejudices that you have to make projects where these people working or doing or just being together. That's important, and this is going on. So a lot of intellectuals goes there and do art with Romas, and that's working very well. But sometimes I feel that sometimes the people just decorate themselves with these minority issues, you know. But even when they do that, it can be good for the Romans too. So it can be a win-win situation. Yeah, basically that's going on.
Zur Bildung gehört ja in gewisser Weise auch das, was Maler Reinhardt Sie Erinnerungspolitik.
Education also entails what you, Maler, called culture of remembrance, that you know the story of right-wing violence in order to be able to understand it and grasp it. Your movie was released in Germany in 2018, and then there was the murder of Walter Lübcke and the attack in Halle, and then there was the attack in Hanau too, where we had 3 brutal acts, which are almost hard to imagine when you think of the history. And yet again, there were politicians that offered explanations, saying, well, this cannot be. But then at the same time, you think, well, this has been ongoing for 50 years now. So what was your perspective about these events after your documentary was released? Unfortunately, our documentary is just as topical as when it was released in 2018. And of course, things have changed. When you think of the attack in Hanau, for example, well, the names of the murdered immediately were released by the media, so they were presented as individuals. But when you take a look at the reports of the affected, it is fair to say that a lot went wrong, structurally speaking. And even though there was a discussion, I do think that a lot still needs to be done in Germany. Unfortunately, not a great deal has changed thus far. We only have a few minutes left, and Bence Flieghauf, you already alluded to it beforehand. It is a topic that is perhaps too big for only a few minutes, but I nevertheless want to ask it, because this is something I think about when I see your 2 movies. Now, when you deal with right-wing violence, the longer you do so, you have to ask the question, what are the reasons, and when is this going to stop? So how far do you dig in order to see how this can be avoided, or how this kind of hatred can be created, how hatred can be so strong that it has to express itself in such extreme violence? So perhaps we don't have a lot of left time, but Bence Flieghauf, When dealing with these topics, what is your answer to this? Where do you end when you think about the causes for this continuity of right-wing violence and right-wing hatred?
Yes, the time is very short for that. For me, I find that very significant and important to understand the universal pattern of racism and xenophobia. Well, it's rooted in our biological past. So I hope it's well known that the racism is not something what we are just put the seed inside us and it starts growing. Rather, the seed is inside already when we are born. It's rooted in our biological past. When the people lived in hordes without the societies, I'm speaking in the Stone Age and before, when basically what is happened, that if two different groups met, then there was conflict, there was clash between them. That means if you wouldn't xenophobic, you wouldn't paranoid with different people, then you died. And that's happened. And the genetic configuration of that people who were scared about the different people, that configuration is going on inside you right now, because if it wouldn't be there, you wouldn't be here, because those people are selected. Now I made a very stupid contraction of the huge analysis of the evolutionary biology of the xenophobia. You can Google it. So basically, this is the background. I strongly recommend to everybody to go into this topic because it's extremely interesting. What we see now, the society is changed. There are no clans going on with weapons to kill each other in this society. Actually, what you are doing is retrograde or a dysfunctional thing when you are xenophobic, because now if you are living in a complex society, your interest is to be able to make deal with people who are different than you. This is the multicultural structure, but we are living in the megapolises like in Berlin or Budapest, Paris or London or wherever where the decisions happens, speaking on politics. So that's very important. And what I quickly want to note, because I think it's important, I was shocked, even in Germany, which is such a sophisticated country, Mala had difficulties to finance that film what she made. This is a scandal. And the same in Hungary. If you do if you try to do some social content here, it's very, very difficult to get money for that. So I would recommend for this is a shame, actually, because I think the foundations, also in Hungary and in Europe generally, or everywhere, should put some kind of small amount of money that you can go for if you do social content. It would have some kind of special support if you have that kind of content in your film. Because you know what is very interesting, when these films are ready and the people are watching this film, everybody has strong opinion about that. It's not like when you do your ego trip in the film, then there are no people to discuss with, you know. But in this case, it can really create social dialogues. And I just personally, I'm shocked how difficult to make films like that. For example, now I wanted to make a film about Reinhardt Höss, who is the grandson of Joachim Höss, who was the chief of Auschwitz. And this Reinhardt Höss, perhaps you know better than me, but he's a very, very strange character, a very strange life what he had, and his complexity, the way how he came, how he reacted. It would be such an interesting, beautiful mirror of the xenophobia generally. But when I was speaking with the German producer, he was like, okay, no, that's we are not going to do. So you know, see, this still is just underfinance in the society to making deal with these issues. And that, I found it the main problem.
Das ist auf jeden Fall ein interessanter Vorschlag, den Sie da gemacht haben, dass man dafür quasi so eine Art...
It's a very interesting proposal that you have a sort of basic budget in order to allow for these types of films, to allow for these types of encounters. Meine Reinhardt, perhaps my question to you would be, do you have an answer to the question as to why there's such a continuity of right-wing violence? And perhaps you could tell us how we could possibly put an end to this. I somewhat struggle with Ben's answer with regards to a genetic core of racism in people, especially in Germany, where a quarter of people have a migration background. I struggle with the arguments of this constellation within us from the Stone Age, but I agree with what Ben said beforehand, that when it comes to education, that this is certainly an important tool to bring about change. And Ibrahim Aslan does a lot of this. He goes to schools and he talks to the younger generation. He explains that these are acts that took place in the recent past. And in my opinion, this can make a huge difference. Because when it comes to racism in Germany, broadly speaking, one speaks a lot about the Second World War. And the Second World War takes up a lot of space in history classes in German schools. But what has happened over the last decades is perhaps not quite as big a topic. And I do believe that it is important to publicize this, be it Ibrahim going to schools or Mai Pung going onto the stage of theaters. Of course, everyone chooses his or her own path. But I would say that this public discourse about right-wing violence, as well as what this does with the victims, what effects this can have on people's lives, I believe it is important to speak about this. It is important to have a conversation about this, to really create a basis to ensure that the silence doesn't continue. Well, this would probably be a point where we could speak a lot more about it. We could also talk more about this question as to whether racism is something that was important in long past societies to, well, defend your own tribe in the past. But perhaps in the meantime, culture has managed to bring about change. And this brings us to the word of civilization, which perhaps has allowed us to learn or to accept behaviors through the means of culture. So perhaps your perspective could also be questioned in a way that, or it could be said that it is culture that could also help us move away from this. Would you like to say something about this, or?
Well, yeah, I basically agree what you're saying, that the culture would, I mean, the culture working on, you know, the culture is going on. It's not, we don't have to do nothing with the culture. It's going on. What we should do, what my point was that with this biological aspect, you have to understand that it's very important to understand that, and this should be the part of the education, is that all these destructive behaviors, like the right wing's attitude, is not something what evil people, just growing, and then they have this conspiracy and all that kind of stuff. It's just it can happen. It's not just about evil people figure out something to do, but it can happen. It's a pattern. You can see easily this pattern. If someone wants to know more about that, just go for Jared Diamond, Steven Pinker, Matt Radley, and the Daniel Dennett books about that. So that would be the part of the education. This would be something what we should put in the education. That's my understanding. And as you said, the culture helps a lot.
Dann danke ich vielmals. Das wäre, wie gesagt, nochmal ein anderes Thema, das zu diskutieren.
In that case, thank you very much. That would be another topic that we could discuss. Milan Reinhardt had just said that in the media, one often speaks and portrays the right-wing perpetrator. In Germany, you often think of skinheads that often aren't taken seriously in movies, and that in itself also leads to issues when it comes to the presence of right-wing terror in this continuity and in difficulties understanding this, says the speaker. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion round. Thank you for allowing us to speak about these two films, and thanks for allowing us to speak about a few further going questions. Thanks a lot, Bence Flieghauf. Thanks a lot, Milan Reinhardt.
Thank you. Thanks.